Each week, we like to break down stories from the three levels of government with CTV political commentator Scott Reid.
And Scott joins us now live in studio once again. Scott, you've been going through the news of the year, the political news. I know you're just pouring over all the articles.
Effort, yeah.
Of course you are, exactly. And you've identified the biggest political stories of 2023. Which level do you want to start at? You want to start with the changes to Toronto Mayor's office, perhaps municipally?
Yeah.
Is that a good one?
Because I think that's the thunderclap of the year.
It was a huge one.
You know, you forget that it happened this year because it occurred, you know, at the beginning of the year, really. Yeah. And, you know, first of all, you've got John Tory, you know, let's call it like it is. He's a friend of mine, but it was a full-fledged four-alarm scandal. And
the squeaky clean Toronto mayor, apparently.
Yeah, you know, the old gray mayor of Toronto politics is like, whoa, what's going on there? So he's out. You got all the controversy around him leaving. It was quite a sensational and spectacle. And then, of course, that prompts a special election, and you get Mayor Chow. What I think is so interesting about that is you see this interesting transition where when John Tory was running for re-election, you know, just a year ago, October, it sort of seemed like, oh, well, you know, naturally he'll get re-elected. Status quo's all fine. No real challengers. Then all of a sudden, once he departs, the whole city kicks off with a debate about how broken Toronto is, how absolutely we need change, and you move to the complete opposite of the political spectrum with Olivia Chow. So I just think that that's been interesting. Even more interesting, in my opinion, Olivia Chow's actually taken a page out of John Tory's book when it comes to how she approaches the mayor's office. Very even keel, very middle of the road. Best pals now, high-fiving and, you know, going for summer barbecues with Doug Ford. So, you know, it's very interesting. In some ways, she's continued John Tory's legacy.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is interesting to watch how it's all unfolding. And, like you said, it happened this year. And
I'll never forget that night. I will never forget that Friday night.
I was flabbergasted. I was here on TV doing it, and I was literally speechless. I said, well, I just don't. It's the last thing on earth I expected. I
think
don't
the same
know
for
what
all
to
of
say.
us. We all just could not believe it.
One of the biggest stories to hit Toronto.
It was an earthquake.
You know, speaking of Doug Ford, provincially, we got to look at the Ford government. They, of course, were stained with the Greenbelt controversy that doesn't seem to go away. But how have they weathered that storm now that some time has passed?
So when you look at it, it was obviously the most severe political crisis they've faced since he came into office in 2018. He lost 2 ministers. He lost a senior chief of staff to one of those ministers. It disrupted his own premier's office. He saw some staff depart from there. So this was a full-fledged political crisis. He's back to where he was before the crisis in the polls. So on the one hand, you could say, well, they've weathered the crisis. He did the apology. He did the full policy reversal. But even today in the Toronto Star, there's a poll that shows while the numbers at the top level are up for Doug Ford, when you ask people about Doug Ford, when you ask people about his personal popularity and personal impressions of him, is he in it for himself? Is he in it for his buddies? Is this government riddled with cronyism? All of those things now have crept into people's perception. So what I would say as a former political advisor is great that you got yourself back up to the lead position from a polling spot, but you've done some brand damage to your premier, and you've got to start doing things that feel a lot less like the Greenbelt scandal, not more like it. Because if you reinforce that impression, those negatives will run you down and they will hurt you in the next election.
More for the people, which really was his campaign the last time around, rather than for what some people say are his buddies, etc.
And now it's become a punchline. It's become something his opponents wield at him. Oh, for the people who go to the Stag and Doe, for the people who pay, you know, to get into your fundraisers. That's not the kind of stain you want, because it's hard to scrub off.
Definitely not. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the top level of government, federal government. Trudeau government had a difficult year. There was that, I don't even know how to describe that summer cabinet shuffle we had. Of course, the cost of living issues as well. But, you know, that translated into some momentum for the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, who's riding high in the polls. So
if you look at the year in federal politics, there's a before and after. Pretty well after July 1st, boom. Pierre Poilievre, 10, 15, 19-point
in one poll,
lead at one point, right? And a couple things happened. One, we'd had months of the affordability crisis, cost of living crisis, where for the longest time, it looked like the Trudeau Liberals couldn't even sort of muster up this, you know, the wit to say people are really feeling the struggle. So they had a lot of difficulty getting their stride on that. Then, of course, you got the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. The Atlantic had been the last sort of refuge of political support for the Liberals. Boom, it hit 18 cents at the gas tank. Boom, that hits. Then they do this awkward reverse. Now, what's the integrity of the carbon tax? And at the same time, Pierre Poilievre, millions and millions of dollars in advertising that shows him at the park with his wife and his beautiful child. Hey, I'm a sunny, super guy, right? And just the combination of all of those things. I would say it was a year of almost inert activity from the Liberals. The big cabinet shuffle that you mentioned in response did nothing, did not reset their message, didn't reset their direction. Who cares? They changed a bunch of people that we didn't know into a bunch of other people that we don't know, right? Doing those jobs. So I think, it was a real brutal year, and that's the demarcation line. Right in the summer, they'd been tied in the polls, and then boom, Poilievre sprang forward. The question for 2024 is whether Trudeau can correct that course, whether he can draw them back to earth and get competitive.
I mean, who says Canadian politics is boring? I mean, sure, when you compare it to what's happening south of the border, it looks like a dry, but there's a whole lot going on.
Well, keep your eyes tuned on, because I think, the election and the potential election of Trump, I think, could come to define Canadian politics this coming year.
Scott, we really appreciate this. It's a great recurring segment. Good to chat with you as always, and we'll see you, I'm sure, in the new year.